This was my very first orchid, and ever since picking it up from the sale aisle at my local nursery, I've been loving everything about it. Now, orchids do require a different type of care and therefore can seem a little bit daunting from your average houseplant, but come on, what's average about this? For me, having enjoyed caring for this little miniature orchid and how to best water and feed it has really demystified the whole process. I'm going big, and clearly I'm ready for more. Thanks for checking out this video. I'm Tyler. If you like what you're seeing or you find this video to be useful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, or better yet, you can subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be creating an epic orchid centerpiece that really prioritizes and simplifies caring for them. The sheer impact and beauty these plants can have, it's no wonder we all love them so much. So stay tuned. I'm going to be sharing some really clever tips and step-by-step instructions on how you too can create your own orchid centerpiece. Here are the things you're going to need. All right, so this vessel that I'm going to use for my orchid display, unfortunately or fortunately, does not have any drainage holes. So the first thing that I'm going to do, and what I always do with any containers that don't have drainage, is I always put a little base layer of horticultural charcoal on the base, and that helps absorb any excess water in the container. And actually, the horticultural charcoal is going to serve a secondary purpose. Now, because the vessel and the base of this vessel is curved and not flat, it's actually going to provide a flat base for me and placing these cups, which serve a very important purpose, and I'm going to get to that next. All right, so by putting in, I'm not sure if you can see, but by putting in about an inch of horticultural charcoal at the base, I've created a really nice foundation for these orchid cups. Now, these orchid cups are probably the most important part of this whole display, because what I've created, or what I'm going to create, is a cup that stays in the display, and the orchids are already in another orchid cup. So basically, I'm creating these little spaces for each individual orchid, and that way, when it's time to water them, I can remove the orchid, which means that the little space that each individual orchid will be living in is preserved and kept by this cup. And again, the whole reason for this is because I'm going to be adding soil around these cups so that I can add some other plants in between at the base of this whole centerpiece and display. All right, so once you've added your charcoal to the base, it's going to be time to add the cups, and then we're going to fill in any of the gaps with some soil mix. And another really good pro tip is I'm going to be using some of this floral wire to sort of contain and combine and attach the three cups together in a really interesting way that you'll see. Because these orchids are so large and weighty. I want to make sure that these cups don't move around within the soil mix, so it's going to be important to kind of do what I'm about to show you. So let's check it out. All right, so I've connected all 3 cups onto the same piece of wire, and I'm not going to connect it or tie it until they're in the container so that I have the right amount of tension and the right length. So let's go ahead and do that now. All right, so now I need to place and get the angle right of the cups. I do want them slightly angled outwards so that the orchids have this sort of slight angle so that the flowers are a little bit overreaching and flowing, extending out. All right, so I have gone ahead and placed the cups in. I have not yet connected the florist wire. Charcoal's still there. So I just tightly secured that florist wire, tied a couple, I think 3 knots, and then removed any of the excess wire. So now I'm ready to show you guys the other plants. Now these are the Velvet Zebra Tradescantia, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, that I want to use at the base of my arrangement, my centerpiece, in the little gaps and voided space that the orchids and the orchid cups are not going to be filled in. So these, how to care for these plants, they need a good draining soil, and they can be watered when they dry out. So that's good for the orchids because they are not going to need a lot of water, or any more water than the orchids may need, which means that that soil isn't going to really have too much of an impact on these little containers and on the orchids. And really importantly, I chose these because of these cool, because of the cool sort of texture that they have, but also because the shape of the leaves on these really complements the shape of the orchid leaves, and I think it will look really cute. And these guys do trail up to anywhere from 10 to 16 inches, although these guys are going pretty much up in height. I'm hoping that over time they sort of trail below so that I'm getting the height from the orchids, but also kind of this cool coverage on the base of the centerpiece as well. So to get going with that, I'm going to show you the soil mix that I'm going to use and then start to fill in that space of my centerpiece. All right, so for my soil mix for my Velvet Zebra, I'm going to be using some coconut coir that has some perlite already mixed into it, and I'm gonna add some additional grit just to help with the drainage even more so. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix up just enough to fill up a few inches around the cups and the base of the display. And then I'll be ready to pop these guys in and then fill the remainder with the soil mix. Now I'm using only a little bit of the grit. I'm using about 4-to-1 or 5-to-1 ratio of the coconut coir to the grit. So like I said, just a little bit of grit to help with the drainage. And now that I have some of this mixed up, I'm gonna go ahead and carefully get that in the empty space of my centerpiece. All right, so I've gone ahead and filled in the soil, left some little spots for the Velvet Zebra, and now I'm gonna go ahead and take these out and place them carefully in the container. Now I do have 3 little spots and 2 of these plants, but I do plan on using some moss to cover some of the one empty spot, but also to be placed over the cups so you can't see those day to day as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and put these in 2 of the 3 empty spaces. Just get them nice and settled. Like so. Let's give this a squeeze to make it easier to get out. Like that. Just loosen some of this carefully. All right. All right, so now that those two are in, I can go ahead and add some more soil mix just to fill in the rest of the space. All right, so I've gone ahead and added as much of the soil mix as I possibly could have to really come right up to the top of the container. Now I'm just gonna go ahead and make sure that it's just sort of firmly pressed in so that there aren't too many gaps or air pockets, and by going slowly and carefully, I've done a good job at avoiding getting too much, if any, soil mix into the cups. And you just want to make sure that you kind of press nice and firmly around the velvet zebra. Just make sure that they're in there securely, which they are, which is great. So really, we've created just kind of two different environments, one for the orchids and the cups, and then the secondary environment for the these other little plants here. And it might seem a little bit weird to only have two of these, but really the foliage on the orchids is quite large and big. So I think by just having two, that leaves plenty of space to kind of properly get the orchids in without sort of overcrowding this whole container. So I'm going to just clean up the edges, and then I'll show you how to place the orchids in this centerpiece. All right, so I just watered them a tad, and you should get a great idea of how this has kind of all come together. So at this point, I'm ready to add the 3 orchids. Let's see how that goes. All right, so I've gone ahead and placed all the orchids in, and it looks spectacular. All right, and again, just to highlight the cleverness of using these 2 containers is that now these are incredibly easy to lift right out. Then you can dunk them in water for about 20 minutes once a week, which is what I do when it comes to watering them. And if you need to use the fertilizer sticks or switch any of those out, everything just becomes very easy to manage, and caring for these orchids is very simple. But I wanted to zoom in now. The plastic container that the orchids came in is about an inch and a half taller than the ones that I have in the pot, and that's not an error, that's by design. So you can, as it stands right now, see a little bit of the top of these plastic containers, and that leads me to the final, basically the final step of this whole process is going to be to add some moss to cover any of the containers or exposed parts that you don't want showing. And let's go ahead and do that now. All right, guys, well, I finished by adding some moss. Now, because you are going to have to, fiddle around with the moss, remove it once you are going to water your orchids using I like to use the dunk method. So it is a good idea, or I would suggest that you use larger pieces of moss, and then that way it's really easy to remove them quite easily and quickly to go water your orchids, and then place it all back together. But overall, all in all, I am incredibly happy with how this looks and how it's all turned out. It just looks fantastic, and I hope you guys get inspired by the beautiful orchid centerpiece that I've created and create one of your own. And if you do, please share photos with me, send me an email, or share them with me on social media, on my Instagram account or Reddit, whatever you would like. I would love to see what it is that you guys create. Well, that's it for me. Miss you guys already. See you next Saturday.
Wake up and smell the roses.